me. My name is Paul Mansell. I have an amazing wife, Caroline, sitting in the back there. I've also got a great friend with me today, towering at 6'8", Keith at the back. If you haven't met him before, you can't miss him. My mum's also here. I'd also like to welcome a manager as well, who Joanne and Caroline met, I think, here in Youghal High Street. So it's great to have everyone here today with us. I'm going to kick off by getting you to do a little bit of work before I do some work. Okay? So I'm going to give you about a minute, someone next to you or around you, to discuss which is the odd one out and why is that the odd one out. So I'll give you a minute, have a little discussion, have a little think. Which is the odd one out and why?
I think we got it.
Figure it out. Yeah. Right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There we go, that's our minute. I'm going to start my stopwatch. Right. So, who thinks they know what the odd one out is?
Yeah.
Mike, go on then.
I think it's the football player, because he's doing it for the glory. All the other three examples are they're helping others in crime, in teaching, and everything. I'm sorry if it's wearing a West Ham.
Taxi for Mike. Keith, what do you think is the odd one out?
I think West Ham, they're not achieving anything.
What is this? What is this? Sit down. Enough of that. Diane.
Footballer, because they're all servants.
That's right. Maybe.
He's wearing shorts.
Right, we'll move on. Obviously, he's up there. Any excuse to put a picture of a West Ham player up there. And we actually have won 2 games in a row recently, yesterday, so we're actually not doing too bad, we're fighting back. Okay, but I wonder if any of you looked closely enough at this image here and could look at what it said at the top there. St John's Ambulance. That might change maybe what you think, because actually that is the odd one out. Does anyone know why they think St John's Ambulance is the odd one out?
Voluntary job.
Yes! All these other jobs are paid. He's the West Ham captain, so I don't mind how much he gets paid. They can get paid a ridiculous amount. A teacher, yes, we get paid. Not enough. We get paid. Obviously, a police officer, they get paid. But a St John's Ambulance or St John's worker is a voluntary role. And we're going to come back to that later on, because we're going to talk about volunteers. So the title of my sermon this morning is The Holy Lottery. The Holy Lottery. And we're on to Nehemiah 11 now, so if you haven't been here before, the context of Nehemiah is that the Jews have just returned from exile in Babylon. They were exiled there. The majority of the Jewish community was taken into exile by the Babylonian kings, and they returned to Jerusalem, and they returned to a city that was in ruins. And Nehemiah talks about how they're trying to rebuild that city and how they're trying to repopulate it. So again, another little bit of a context there with it. Describes a settlement of people in Jerusalem, surrounding towns. This took place in 444 BC, and what's pretty cool is there are some archaeological findings actually, which I discovered, some pottery dating to that time, which shows evidence of repopulation of that area, so it sort of corroborates that time frame. So what they're trying to do is, as you can see there, ensure that the capital city was sufficiently inhabited and defended. So last week Franklin talked us through chapter 10 and some highlights from that covenant that the people were making with God was they promised to follow the scriptures in verse 29, They committed to raise their children in a way that pleased the Lord, especially regarding their marriage. They vowed to honour the Sabbath in their business practices. Most of all, they promised to support the temple financially and through their labour. And Franklin took us through that last week. And the chapter ends with a really powerful line. It says, "Thus we will not neglect the house of God."
Yeah.
And that's how that chapter ends. And that leads us into what we're looking into now in chapter 11. And that, a new challenge arose. And this is talking about how God's people approach that challenge with faith and with sacrifice. So let's read. Oh, there we go. If you're not sure, forgot to put that up there. This is what we're talking about here. This is the area here in Jerusalem and Judea. This is where they were in exile over in Babylonia. So they've now gone back to their homeland over there. Just to give you a bit of context about the area that we're talking about. So this is Nehemiah chapter 11 verse 1 to 2 we're going to mainly focus in on. So let's read that now. Now the leaders of the people settled in Jerusalem. The rest of the people cast lots to bring one out of every 10 of them to live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while the remaining 9 were to stay in their own towns. The people commended all who volunteered to live in Jerusalem. These are the provincial leaders who settled in Jerusalem, now some Israelites, priests, Levites, temple servants and descendants of Solomon's servants lived in the towns of Judah, each on their own property in the various towns, while other people from both Judah and Benjamin lived in Jerusalem. So there's a bit of a challenge there that they had, and the challenge was there was an underpopulated city. So they were building this wall, but then they didn't have anyone to live in it. And this was alluded to earlier in chapter 7 verse 4, where it reads, "Now the city was large and spacious, but there were few people in it, and the houses had not yet been rebuilt." So Nehemiah knew that the wall that they had, it wasn't enough. A city, as we know, needs people who would live there, defend it, especially in those times, defend it and also worship God in it. But before that could happen, something else had to come first. The people's hearts, as we learned last week, needed to be devoted spiritually before they could be devoted physically. God and their commitment to God had to come first before any action could take place. And that's what happened in chapters 8 to 10. The spiritual renewal that was happening prepared them for this practical challenge. So why did this challenge occur? The city of Jerusalem had been without a wall for 142 years. And in ancient times, you couldn't defend a city if it didn't have a wall. It needed a wall, strong, well-fortified outer wall to defend the city. And back in the first chapter, way back when we started looking in Nehemiah, it was reported that the people of God had become a disgrace. And you can read it here. They said to me, "Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire." So there was a direct relationship. How people viewed this city depended on, if it had a wall, then it was viewed as a strong fortified. If the wall was crumbling and broken down, you can see here, people were laughing and it was a place of disgrace. So now that so much time had passed, moving back into the city, it was going to require sacrifice. I'm not going to talk very much about sacrifice this morning. Now imagine moving back into a city that had been unoccupied or sparsely occupied for that long a time. Maybe sometime on your holiday, you've maybe seen like an old rundown town or something like that. This is a deserted town. That's actually in Turkey. Okay, this wasn't our hotel. We actually went to Turkey. October half term, we'd actually see this place. It might have been the hotel Keith stayed in because he went to Turkey. But this is a deserted town. So it might have looked something like that, with crumbling buildings, broken down leaves and trees growing everywhere. And the people are being called to go back and repopulate that place. So why was this important to solve? People were needed to protect the city. Even now the wall was in place, but the city still needed people to be there to defend it from attack. Right. No good just having a wall there and nothing. Also people were needed to work in the temple.
That's right.
The temple had to be completed previously. Actually, the prophet Ezra had completed the temple, but now the temple had to be staffed. For something to be successful, you need staff to work it. And to complete the work God had called them to do.
Well,
there'd be no point in finishing the wall and thinking that was it and the temple and leaving it and just leaving it there. For it to be a vibrant place where God could be worshipped and to be a place that could be protected, it needed people to live there and worship there. Now, so the overall point is the problem had been alluded to in chapter 7, and now after what happened in chapter 8 and 10, where the spiritual renewal of the people had happened, it's now time to tackle this problem and get it solved. So let's now talk about that. Those who stepped up to meet the challenge.
Well, come on, Paul.
Now, we're not going to read each verse in chapter 11 this morning, but we're just going to focus in, hence the odd one out activity at the beginning. We're just going to focus in on one particular group of people that are particularly noted, and it's those who volunteered. In verse 1 speaks about how the people cast lots, so that 1/10 of the people would live in the city. So a bit like a holy lottery, hence the title of today's sermon about that. So I thought, okay, what does it mean to cast lots back then? So I looked it up on obviously the most reliable source, Google. So in the Old Testament, casting lots was a method used to determine God's will for decisions, from dividing land among tribes to assigning temple duties. The practice was not seen as a random game of chance, but as a way to ensure an impartial outcome with the belief that God directed the decision. And it says in Proverbs 16:33, we may throw the dice, but the Lord determines how they fall. And it might have looked something like that back then. Methods could have included drawing sticks, stones, or marking bits of pottery, similar to flipping a coin or rolling a dice today. It's interesting that the people had promised to tithe, and the tithe means 10%, tithe from their possessions in the previous chapter to support the temple. Now they are tithing 1/10 of themselves to support the city. Imagine us, okay, we're going to go and do a church planting in Brighton. Yeah. And let's get us all together in families of 10, and we're going to cast lots.
Come on.
And if you get drawn, you're going to move to Brighton.
That's
wow.
Right.
It would be something like that. That's what it would have been back then.
Yeah.
Verse 2 goes on to talk about those who volunteered and how they were especially praised by the people. There's a difference between casting lots and getting chosen by chance, or God's direction, should I say, as opposed to volunteering. If you're not sure what a volunteer is, a person who freely gives up their time to undertake a task. They don't get paid. You see a person who works for an organisation like St John's Ambulance, but they don't actually get paid. That's what a volunteer means. So some were chosen by lot, but others stepped forward willingly. They love God and the city so much that they chose to leave comfort behind and move inside the walls.
Come on.
And here's where Remembrance Sunday connects beautifully. The people who moved into Jerusalem gave up their homes. They gave up friends, security, not for fame, but for a better future for others. That's the same spirit we remember today. Soldiers who left everything familiar to protect others. Families who carried the pain of loss so others could live in freedom.
Wow.
I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about my own granddad.
Come on.
My granddad went to fight in Burma. If you're not sure where Burma is, you can see it over here just to the right of India. It's actually now called Myanmar. And this is I think the capital here now, but you can see where it is. What's that? Myanmar, is it? Is that right? Yeah. That's it. There we go, perfect. But you can see where it is, so that's what we're talking about. So my granddad's gone all the way from over here, travelled all the way over to fight in Burma, so, a long way. So the Burma campaign was between 1942 and 1945. There was a major series of battles in World War II between the Allied forces, mainly British Commonwealth, Chinese and later American troops, and the Japanese Empire, which had invaded Burma. Now Japan had cut off all the Allied supply routes to China and secured access to India. So Japanese forces quickly overran Burma, forcing the Allies into a retreat in 1942, and then the Allies were able to regroup, improving their training, and from 1943 onward they launched a counter-offensive. So my granddad was involved in that, and with the help of local resistance fighters as well, a special British Indian force operating behind enemy lines. They were called the Chindits. Some of you may have heard of those. So by 1945, Allied forces had recaptured most of Burma, including Rangoon, which I think was the capital back then. The thing though, the campaign was marked by jungle warfare, extreme hardship, and heavy casualties. But what it did do, it played a key role in weakening Japan's position in Southeast Asia and reopening supply routes to China. Total casualties, around 200,000 were killed, wounded or missing in that battle itself. Out of the British Commonwealth forces, including Indian, African and British troops, about 86,600 casualties, including roughly 13,000 killed. So that's what my granddad was involved in. That was my granddad. Richard Baird lived between 1911 and 1980 as part of the 53rd Holding Regiment. So this was him when he first went, I think. That was some friends out in Burma or in training here. There's another one of his friends. We've actually got this picture on the top of my mum and dad's landing at home, top of the stairs. It's up there on there. There he is with my mum. I think, what were you, about 2 there, mum? Yeah, I think she was about 2 there. And then, can you guess who this handsome, beautiful little baby is?
Still got a baby face, mate.
There's my granddad with me. My granddad with my mum. So, my granddad came back when my mum was about 5. One of her earliest memories is seeing this man in uniform walking up the road and not knowing who he was. He was one of the fortunate ones to make it home, but I'm sure the scars from war lived with him permanently. Sadly, his wife, my grandma Doris, died suddenly when my mum was 13. So not only had to fight in one of the most gruesome battles, he now had lost his wife, and had to raise my mum on his own.
Wow.
But what an amazing job he did,
Yeah.
my mum. My granddad Richard's my middle name, Paul Richard Mansell. Sadly he died when he was 68. I was just 2, so I think it must have been not long after that picture. I still have, even from 2 years old, I still have a memory of my granddad. That's how much of an impact he made. And I do regret that he did die and I didn't get to spend more time with him. Because my older brothers and sisters talked about how much of an amazing man he was.
Go on, Paul, we're with you, buddy.
Excuse me. So maybe the effects of the war finally took their toll on this wonderful man. This is his medals that he received. I've got this put together for one of my mum's birthdays. So this one here, this is called the Burma Star. That was quite a prestigious medal to receive. It was given because of the extreme hardship, the extreme battle that they were in. For soldiers that fought in the Burma, they received the Burma Star for the sacrifice they made fighting in that war. So this is up in my mum and dad's living room just to commemorate my granddad. He was one of the fortunate ones to come back. As we know, many thousands and millions didn't. His and many other sacrifices echo through generations, just like the faithfulness of those who rebuilt Jerusalem shaped the generations after them. And I found this quote: "Soldiers gave up comfort so others could have peace." And that's also what being a disciple of Jesus looks like. Following Jesus means personal cost. Not because God wants us to suffer, but because love always costs something. That sacrifice could look like giving time to help someone struggling. Maybe you could do that. Move into another city to help start a church there, Brighton or Guildford.
That's right, come on.
Sharing your faith, even though it feels incredibly scary and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Letting go of pride to forgive. Being known as the church kid at school and standing strong anyway.
Come on.
That can take sacrifice. Remembrance Sunday teaches us freedom isn't free. Faith isn't either. Both are built on the sacrifices of others, and sometimes on our own. And volunteering takes sacrifice. You know, many people in the wars did volunteer. Yes, there was conscription, but many actually volunteered before that came into place. I know many American soldiers also volunteered. You know, volunteering takes sacrifice. You know, and I think about all those who volunteer in the church. You know, sadly, we've lost 2 volunteers recently in Trevor and in Pablo, 2 great volunteers. You know, here in our region, I want to lift up all of those who volunteer. Now, if you volunteer in some capacity in our region, in our Surrey region, can you please stand up? If you volunteer in some capacity. Come on, if you volunteer in some capacity, hospitality, AV, Bible talk, KK, right? Guys, that is awesome. You know, I think about the sacrifices that takes, you know, to volunteer. And it sort of links onto the rest of our passage, because in verse 9, it goes on and talks about there's overseers in Jerusalem. In verse 10, there's an official in the charge of the house of God. I thought maybe that could be Franklin. Verse 12, workers for the temple. Verse 16, workers outside the temple. Maybe they provided food like our hospitality team.
That's right.
Verse 17, leaders in thanksgiving and prayer. Verse 19, gatekeepers, protecting everyone. That could be the ushers. Come on, the ushers. Verse 22, musicians. Come on, the song leaders and the worship team. Verse 24, king's agent in all affairs relating to the people. I thought maybe that could be like a deacon role, like what Mark feels. So, you know, even back then they had all these roles just like we have today.
That's right.
So the point is there was a need for people to move back into the city so the worship and daily life of God's holy city could be restored.
That's right.
And God used volunteers to get that done. So let's spend the rest of our time thinking about that. Now, much of God's work is done through willing volunteers. It talks it in Galatians 5:13. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather serve one another humbly in love.
Amen.
1 Corinthians 16:15. You know that the household of Stephanus were the first converts in Acacia, and they have devoted themselves to the service of the Lord's people. There was Priscilla and Aquila as well, a couple that we know that volunteered and devoted themselves to God. You know, all through the scripture we see the importance of cultivating a willing heart. Now, perhaps you've heard the statement, in many churches, 90% of the work is done by 10% of the people. So, of course, the obvious question that flows out of this is, are you a willing volunteer? Are you a willing servant?
Good question.
Or do you find yourself saying, someone else will do it? Like this mythical someone else. You know, I'd love to know who this someone else is. Because this someone else has to be either superhuman at their job, or they just are incredibly burnt out and maybe going to have a breakdown. Because the amount of jobs that someone else gets given is quite a lot, isn't it? And I've even said it, I think, oh, someone else will do it. Someone else will do it. Who is this someone else that's going to do it? Who is it? So what are some things that you may have to sacrifice to volunteer? There's some things I can think of. Maybe it's energy. It does take energy to volunteer. Yeah. You might have to sacrifice your energy and think about your schedule and how you can preserve some energy so you can volunteer. Maybe it's time. Maybe you have to sacrifice some hobbies or to volunteer more. I'm not saying you necessarily have to stop something, or unless it, you know, is a negative influence, maybe you do, but thinking about the balance of, okay, how much am I serving, but how much am I devoted to my hobbies? Maybe it's money. You know, some people have to spend a lot on travelling here to church. You know, I think about Victoria Lewis coming all the way from, where is it, Battersea, isn't it? You know, up that way, you know, Mary Cozier and other people that take public transport. Come on, Mary. And there's many others. You know, many others. I think of Victoria and Mary because I've known them the longest. Ever since I became a Christian, I've known them, and they've been volunteering and sacrificing for longer than I've been a Christian, which is over 17 years. You think about that. It's huge. So you might have to sacrifice some money to volunteer. Maybe it's relationships. You know, maybe there's some negative relationships in your life that you may have to sacrifice to volunteer because they're consuming too much of your time. It could be Xbox. Maybe you're playing too much Xbox, which means actually you don't have the time to volunteer or sacrifice and serve. So it could be getting a balance right in that. I'm not saying you shouldn't play Xbox, but again, thinking about the balance of time. And then phone usage. Yeah. Wow. If you were at the end of the week to go onto your phone, and you can find on your phone, can't you, how much screen time you've used that week. You can do it and you can see it. You think about how much screen time and how much of that is probably unnecessary, wasted, and that could be actually used to serve, volunteer, support, sacrifice in the way that we talked about. So it could be sacrificing phone usage. So that might be a little evaluation you want to do. Look at your screen time at the end of the week and think, wow, how many hours have I spent looking at my phone, and how I could use that time, you know, for God.
Come on, bro.
So why did they volunteer? So I think it's important, isn't it? We can talk about volunteering, but you know, why did they volunteer? You know, I believe they saw the need. You know, back in Nehemiah's time, these people saw the need that was there. They saw that they had to go and repopulate that city for God. You know, they chose building God's house over their own personal comfort. They put God first and his mission. That's what the volunteers did back in Nehemiah's day, and that's why we need volunteers now. We are called to serve. Look at Philippians 2:3-4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Colossians 3:23-24. Whatever you do, work at it all with your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Mark 10:45. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Matthew 23:11-12. The greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. It's a response, isn't it? It's a response to our faith. Back in Nehemiah, it was a response to their faith in God, their trust in God. Now it's a response to our faith, the grace we have received, and the love that Christ has given us. In James 2:14-26, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such a faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if not accompanied by action, is dead. 2 Corinthians 5:14-15, for Christ's love compels us, because we are convinced that one died for all, and therefore all died. And he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. You know, Christ's love compels us, living out our faith in action. You know, as we close this out, we're going to hear from a couple of willing volunteers. Now, they couldn't be here today because it's Earwan's birthday, so they've gone away for the weekend. But I thought I'd ask, you know, some people to share why they serve, because you can hear from me, but let's hear from what they say. So this is from Elizabeth. Why do I volunteer to serve in the church? Serving has become second nature to me as a follower of Christ. When I see a need or something that needs to be done and I know I can help, I don't stop to question it. I simply step in and give. God has blessed me with certain strengths and abilities, and I believe they're meant to be used for his glory. Sometimes my willingness to help can lead me to take on too much, but even then I'm reminded of Jesus' ultimate sacrifice. He gave his whole life for me, so serving in his kingdom is the very least I can do in return. And then Ewan, when you realise that God isn't giving you this much blessing, and he said a pinch in brackets, but he's actually giving you this much blessing, you just can't help not to share it with others. As a Christian, Jesus called us to love our God and love our neighbours as we love ourselves. Serving in church equals serving my God, who has given me my salvation. This is why it's joyful to serve the church as I'm serving God. Just like 2,500 years ago, they were all part of a united group on a mission for God, and we are called to be that too. 1 Corinthians 27. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. Now we are a part of God's mission. I found this quote as well, which I thought was quite cool. You're chosen to build, not chill. You're chosen to build and not chill. I believe God has brought us here to Yule, to this new place, to continue the work of building his house here in Surrey.
That's right.
And the south of England. Just like Nehemiah needed willing volunteers to make that happen, God still desires that now. As you've seen, if you're already a volunteer, and as it says back in verse 2 in Nehemiah, you are commended by all the people. If you aren't yet volunteering to serve, I encourage you to speak to someone about how you can serve as we make God known here in the south of England. And if you're new to all this and you haven't got a clue what I'm talking about, then I encourage you to speak to someone and discover the great plans God has for your life. Thank you for listening this morning.